listen to. I've got a lot of stories for you. I bet I've got a big hunk of your repertoire because I've taped you probably 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, I keep picking up stories.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Yeah. But I'm going to put them all together sometime. My early ones were on wasn't a very good recorder. The first time I ever did you was in 1975 or 6 at the. In fact, that's the time I met you at the White River Valley Historical Society meeting, and you gave a talk. And really,
that's right.
And that's the first time I met you.
From Springfield Valley, because he didn't learn more about history.
Oh, well.
I don't pretend to do history.
Of course, I got in trouble with Mrs. Mayhews because of my programs, I know, because I had music and stuff in them, and I know some of them didn't like. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell me that champion fighter story here then?
Yeah.
And it's going. Yeah.
Now, you see, that's where we talk about A. Harold.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, when you get to that, just explain what it is. That's fine. Because
well,
these
that's
people,
what I was getting at. See.
I've got people from all over
they won't know what it is.
No.
And when we did that on public television.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
That boy said, A. Harold, he went in, how they did to explain what it was, said they used railroad spikes. Well, that's not right.
Yeah.
They might have made a little dicky Harold.
Yeah.
But the real Harold was, I can describe it all right. Have you got a battery you want to hook it up?
Oh, no, it's battery. It's fresh batteries in it.
Is it on now?
It's on, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, this story is known as the champion fighter of Arkansas. Now, there was a fellow over around Blue Eye in Stone County, Missouri, in the southern Ozarks, that claimed to be a champion fighter. Now, he had fought and whipped all the would-be fighters in Stone, and Berry, and Taney, and all around. He claimed to be the champion fighter of Missouri. Now, just across the Arkansas line, at Alpena Pass, Arkansas, there was a man who was laid claim to being the champion fighter of Arkansas. He'd whipped everybody in Boone and Carroll and all those counties around that wanted to fight, and so he proclaimed himself to be the champion fighter of Arkansas. Now, this Missouri scrapper, he learned about this champion fighter of Arkansas, and so one morning he said to his old woman, "Old woman, I've been hearing of this champion fighter of Arkansas, and of course I'm a champion fighter of Missouri, and I decided I'll go over there and locate him and challenge him to fight. And I'll whoop him, of course, and then I'll be the champion of Missouri and Arkansas both." Well, his old woman didn't say nothing. He got on his mule and he rode off, crossed the line over the hills and hollers, and finally he came to a little cabin, and he hollered at the gate. Now, here in these hills and many other places, I suppose, you just don't walk up and knock on the door, because something might be going on there that they didn't want you to know about. Anyway, he hollered at the gate, and a woman came out, wiping her hands on her apron, and he said, "Good morning." And she said, "Good morning." And he said, "I've been looking for the champion fighter of Arkansas. I thought this might be where he lived." "Yeah, you're right," said, "here's where he lives. But he's not here," said, "he's sowing oats over there on that little mountain field across that big hollow." Now, said, "You go down that trail there and up the hill," said, "you could probably hear him cussing before you get there." Well, he turned his mule about and he rode down across the hills, across the hollows and up there, and he came to a railed fence around a patch of ground on top of the hill. And he looked across the field, and the largest man he ever saw in his life was sowing oats. Now, he was in broadcasting grain in the old days. Of course, they had a sack around their shoulders to sow out of. Well, he was heavy enough, big enough, and he had a bed tick. sowing oats out of that bed, broadcast. And he had a harrow attached to each ankle. Now, they usually pull a harrow with a team of horses. Now, we might explain what a harrow is. An a harrow is made of heavy sawed timber, about 8 inches square, and there are 2 pieces about 10 feet long. And at one end of this piece of timber, it's sawed so it'll match the other and make a shape V. And then there's a cross beam the same size put across the middle of that, and that makes the A. Now, the old blacksmith would take an auger and bore a hole about every 10 or 12 inches through these A pieces. And the stores in those days, general stores, carried harrow teeth. But now our Ozarkers didn't say harrow, they said har. Anyway, they would get these harrow teeth and they'd drive them into these holes. And it made a good implement for covering grain. All right, now our Arkansas champion, he was going across the field. He had one of these big old harrows attached to each ankle, dragging in these oats as he sowed them. He got to the end of the field and he turned around and came back up to where this Missouri champion was sitting on his bugle. And the Missouri champion said, "Good morning, sir." And the Arkansas champion said, "Good morning." The Missourian said, "I've been hearing that you was the champion fighter of Arkansas." And the Arkansaw said, "You heard rightly." He said, "Well, sir, I just read over here this morning to tell you that you was also the champion of Missouri."
That's a good, right on the verge of a tall tale, getting close. That's good. Because see, thank you. That's, I've got, on the story, I'm going to do it in sections. And this all will take about 30 minutes, this part of it. I've got, my storytelling is going to be the first thing. Now, I've got 2 stories that are true stories, Well, like your Hootie Jones is a true story. But these are more just lifestyle. And I picked out some that would be not just, because, these people aren't going to be interested in this part like we are, I mean, you and I are completely interested in this and the fiddle. But I've got Mona's grandfather telling the story about school at Gougi, which was at Clever. And the reason they called it was Pleasant Hope, but they called it Gougi because one of his cousins got his eye knocked out with a stick, so they called it Gougi School. About one teacher that was, I think I told you on the phone, that got so mad he slobbered, and one incident was this boy skipped out early and came the next morning. The teacher said, "I told you if you left early I was going to get you," and he came at him with a big stick. Well, the boy had a rock in his pocket and threw him and hit him in the bare of the ear, as Granddad says on the tape. Hit him, knocked him out. They thought he'd been killed, and said the boy took out the window and never came back again. Then the other story was about another teacher that took one of Granddad's cousins and hung him by his thumbs on the wall for about 20 minutes, and said his hands swelled up big and everything. Said his whole family came and said at the end of it, the teacher promised he wouldn't do that no more. And then I got the other one, was Mabel Hall. Tuffy Hall was superintendent of schools over around Crane, up north of Crane.
One of the Hall was county clerk.
That's all right. Mabel Hall was his widow. And then she worked at the courthouse at Galena for a number of years too. Because she used to tell me about Leonard Short coming into town, all the little kids running around while he bought them candy and let them go, paid for their way to go to the movie there. But she tells one then, a story about, and this would have been her dad, or no, been her husband's, when he was a boy or something, which would have been in the 1870s. But anyway, how they broke up a play party that they weren't invited to. But the thing about it is, she gets to laughing so hard during it that she can hardly tell the story. That's why I wanted to show the humor that a lot of Ozarkans have. Well, and then these were folklorists, so I've never, these aren't bad, but even then I would never really have, here I would never do this, like the White River Valley Historical Society. But I've got one story that Dewey told me, No, got one story that J. Frank Short told me that they always told over here that Doc Henson over at Galena, they said, used to tell about Ad Kirkendall was a big old guide on the river, big 6'6" guide, and he was constipated. And the story is that the doc gave Ailsey, his wife, some laxative and said, now you watch what happens and let me know if this works or not. Well, he didn't see him for 3 or 4 days. Well, then he got a call. Ad had been in an apple tree and fallen out. He better go over and check on him. So he goes over to check, and Ad was okay. And so when they were leaving, he kind of cornered Ailsey, and he said, now, Ailsey, he said, while I'm here, he said, I want to find out how'd that work? How about this and that? Did you check and watch everything to make sure everything worked with it? She said, Doc, I don't know if it worked or not. She said, I was checking and watching all this stuff, and she said, he had one, it's about 1 foot long and it's broke in the middle, but we figure that happened when he fell out of the apple tree. That's a story. J. Frank used to tell me these stories, and I used to believe them, see?
I told.
What was one you were, Uncle John Hilsebeck, you said there was one?
I wanted to tell you that. I asked not Dr. Flanders, if a deal was, I said, John, I've got one little off-color story about something
Gilmore.
else.
I bet it's Bob Gilmore, wasn't it? Yeah, okay.
And I said, I don't care about telling it, never told it in public, but I just ask you people if you want it. They said, oh, they want to hear it. So this is the story. Of course, everybody knows Uncle John said, I say.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Meet him on the street in the morning, and he'd say, I say it's a fine day. Or he'd say, I believe I'll go to the saloon. I say, let's go fishing. I say. Well, this is a true story. And one day before of course, just the old White River.
Yeah.
He had his line set, and he was paddling down the river. And there's 2 girls sitting on the bank fishing with a pole. And he said, you gals have any luck? I said, no, Uncle John said, we're not fishing for fish, and we're fishing for a man. Said, I say, you're sitting on the bait.
I heard a lot of, Emmett used to tell me a lot of stories about, did I ever tell you, W.W. Johnson told me one about Uncle John Hilsebeck too. He said when W.W. was just a little boy, he said he'd go fishing with Uncle John. And he said they went down one time to, let's see, how they worked, he helped him seine minutes.
Yeah.
And he said, now, Uncle John said, I say. He said, now, we've got to be even about this. And he said, we'll share these even. He said, we'll each take a handful. And, of course, he said he was just about 10 years old. He said he'd reach in, his little old hands wouldn't get but about 6 or 7 minutes. He said Uncle John had great big hands. He said he'd come out there with about 2 dozen. And he said he ended up with just a dozen. He had about 4 or 5 dozen, But I think that's who was telling me. I think it's W.W. was telling me that.
Yeah, you're right. It was Pawpaw Johnson, we call him, his dad lived.
Yeah.
And he times hard and he'd a little real estate office. He liked pawpaws. He'd go across the river and gather a basket of pawpaws. And he just went with the name Pawpaw Johnson. Then there's a story about Wendy Bell Wright. I told a lot about him, but Carol told me this story. I made a talk at Mark Twain's school once. And she said Wendy Bell was carrying the mail from Kazee Mills up Beaver Creek. Had to ford Beaver Creek about 6 times.
Yeah.
Getting to Old Hilda. The name used to Hildy.
Yeah.
And he'd get up, they'd bring the mail through there, and he'd pick it up. They'd go on towards Pro-Tem, and he'd take the mail up to Hilda. And while he's waiting around, like they'd have to sort the mail, why, they'd go down to the blacksmith shop and play poker. Well, somebody reported them to the grand jury, and they indicted Wendy Bell for gambling. Well, he came in, and old John T. Moore on the bench. He was a kind old soul. He wouldn't send a moonshiner to the pay on it. Thought that's what got him beat. Well, anyway, Wendy Bell came in. They read the charge to him, and he pled guilty to gambling. Judge Moore, in his kind way, said, Mr. Wright, said, didn't you know this, the law to gamble? Wendy Bell said, yes, Judge, I know it's against the law to play poker, but I didn't know the law wretches fur up his heel.
I heard you tell that one time. Say, did I tell you Clay and I, last year, went over here to Kazee Mill to eat at that restaurant over there, at the intersection?
Sanders.
Yeah, Sanders. And a young girl was waiting at our table. Oh, 21, 22 probably. And so she brought the bill, and I said, "Oh, let me have that." And Clay reached up and grabbed it. And I said, "Clay, I wanted that." And she said, she said, "Yeah, you wanted it," but she said he reached up and got it before you had a chance.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't think some of this dialect still exists, now that girl wasn't putting that on. That was exactly the way she said it, you know.
Yeah. And they'd say, a lot of people still say fetch, you know.
Oh yeah, I hear that. And poke, still hear poke quite a bit, you know. But
and
you
that
know,
word sinkhole, that fools most everybody. I told Bob Flanders that he had it down here when I spoke the last time, and some lady teacher, and they never heard of it.
I've heard, but I can't remember what.
I don't know what I told you, Don, but this fellow Joe Clark, the famous photographer, grew up in Tennessee, and he's a self-made photographer, but he made a fortune making native pictures for Jack Daniel's whiskey.
Yeah.
And he now lives up north somewhere, in Chicago or someplace. But Mr. Edom said he wanted to buy books where I tell about Psycho around. And he sent me one of his book of pictures and wrote me the sweetest letter.
Well.
And I pasted the letters in the front of the book. And he said, "Well," said, "greetings from the hills of Tennessee." He said, "I well remember the word Psycho." Said, "My mother many times said, get to that garden, get to that hole, and quit psychoing around."
You mean
and said,
fooling around or
fiddling around?
Fiddling around, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
that was a homemade banjo. The slaves made. I looked it up.
Psycho was that?
And so the slaves made a sort of guitar banjo.
Made a fretless banjo, yeah.
And so you could see why they'd say, "Well, he's playing a little banjo."
Like fiddling around.
Like we say, fiddling around, fooling around, and messing around. And they get that story about the cooling board, you know. They just so many things.
Well, they sure changed
I
it,
just
though.
enjoyed.
Hey, I got a call from a guy in Springfield. It used to be with the Conservation Commission. Now he's working with a multimedia company up there, and they're getting ready to make a new visitor center slide program with narration and everything for the Due Short Visitor Center, Corps Engineers.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, well, I'll be glad to help you how I can. I said, quite honestly, I'm not any great lover of the Corps of Engineers, but I said, to help them from getting too many stereotypes in here, if I can be of a little bit of guidance, I want to. I said, I'd like to, since so many people are going to see it, you know. So I went down and I met the fella that's in charge of it, who used to write for the Kansas City Star, Gary. He's had the other fellow said, now he'll talk slow because he's had a stroke, but he's a young fella, not very old, but he did talk real slow, and I would have probably thought, well, he's really laid back, but he had a little stroke. But anyway, he's really interested in getting some background music and stuff like that. I mentioned Bob Holt for the Square Dance stuff, and then some other things. And I said, when I get back from, I got a thing I'm going to, and I said, when I get back from that, they got all summer to do it, you know. I said, well, when you narrow down and you have specifics, I gave him a bunch of different ideas to think about and maybe to sort. That includes only about a 25-minute film, so you can imagine it won't get much. And I said, when I get back and you're more specific about what you need, then maybe I can pinpoint, well, let's go record this guy, or if you want to shoot some slides or video, these people are good, you know, or something like that. And I said, say, I never have seen those films that you have here. I mean, the programs you already have. And he said, well, they'll show them every 30 minutes or so. He said, about due for one now. So I went down and saw the one called Taming the Rio Blanche, it was called.
What?
Taming the Rio Blanche, the White River, see? Mm-hmm. Well, if I had seen that first, I might not even talk about Corps Engineer propaganda.
Yeah.
They talked about how the White River was such an evil thing until the Corps came, how it was a vicious, rampaging thing, and the floods. They talked about the terrible floods. They didn't talk about the fact that the 5 dams here have got more land underwater permanently than ever was flooded, plus the fact that's why the bottom land was good. The only good land we had was along the bottom. So.
Well, they had me over for the 25th anniversary, and they thought I'd brag on the dam, you know. Boy, I hit them hard.
Well.
I said, I hope you don't build any more dams. You've covered up all the watermelon patches and the pawpaw patches.
That's right.
Cornfields.
No more cane breaks, no nothing anymore, you know. No, I really, if I'd seen that, well, I'll still will though, because I want to kind of. But what I'm afraid is what they're going to do is they'll put in a little tiny bit about the Ozarks, and it'll be more core propaganda.
The other day, I didn't know there was a newspaper. Maybe you do, but it's called the Riverfront Times, published in St. Louis.
I've heard of it.
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
And I had a call, and I thought it was somebody local. Clay referred it to me. He said, I want to talk to you about the Ozarks. He said, we're going to put out a special edition about the Ozarks of the Riverfront Times. And I said, oh, I'll be glad to talk to you. Where are you? He said, St. Louis. And I said, well, it's on you. I'll just get a chair and talk. And when you get tired listening, you can tell me. Now I started out and I said, now, one thing I want you to get straight in this thing. Don't start in to call us hillbillies.
Yeah.
I said, now, there's a group that's following a little Abner thing.
Oh, yeah. That's the stereotype.
And then I said, Jim Owens, bless his heart, he carried it on.
Yeah.
In order to. And I said, now, we're mountain people, mountain folks. And I said, it's all right for us to call one another hillbillies, but we don't want someone from Chicago to call us a hillbilly. He put it in the article just like that.
Well, that's all right. That's okay. That's fine.
That's what I wanted.
Listen, there's a woman over here right now teaching at College of the Ozarks. Can't remember her name now. She's from Iowa, and she was in this elder hospital thing or something. She was kind of the SFO in charge of that. Great big gal. You've probably met her at some time. She teaches some folklore over there, and I hadn't met her before. Her name starts with a K. I forgot, kind of a German or a Dutch name. I can't remember. Anyway, Art and I did a little music program for that thing. I thought it was all a big volunteer thing with, everybody was volunteering their time and these people came to it and everything. I didn't know it was a subscription thing. Each of these people paid $350. These people are all getting paid to do this, And so we went ahead. I didn't know this till after we'd done it. I'd have thought twice. I get tired of doing things for free when all the people that ask you are getting paid to do them, So anyway, when she introduced us, she said, now these two men say they've lived here all their lives and that they're real Ozarkers. I don't think she used the word hillbilly. She might have. I don't remember now. And she said, but I kind of suspect they're really not Ozarkers. In other words, I think she was inferring was that we were educated, and all that. That's all I can figure why she said that. And I thought, and you're teaching folklore at this school? That's kind of ridiculous. But that's what you run into. They come down here. Even Tom O'Neill, bless his soul, that nice young man with the National Geographic. I rewrote that whole article for him. I did, and I've got all the stuff I sent them, and I guarantee you, they changed that article, and I wrote that big hunk of that article because he had so many misconceptions and so many. It's not his fault. It's just they have those, and they're not here long enough to see the difference. And what I always laughed about was they used all the changes I made, and they sent the same article to Flanders and to Rafferty up here, and they didn't even catch the obvious mistakes. There were a whole bunch of it, especially dialect stuff, and they paid them $500 each, and I didn't get a penny out, which I was laughing about. I didn't expect it, But that's what happens. These stereotypes are so embedded in these people from Little Abner and the Beverly Hillbillies and Silver Dollar City and all that, that it really takes a lot to get people to realize. It's
like the ball knobbers.
Yeah, that's right.
This boy, I told him that my grandfather was one of the original 13. Well, then he went ahead and say the Marauder, and I wrote him a stiff letter about that. I said, your article was good till you got off on the wrong foot on the ball knobbers.
Well, these Alf Bowling days, if that isn't the most ridiculous thing. That just disgusts me. That man was kind of like having Billy the Kid days. I mean, there's just a killer is all he was, know. And they take these characters and the Bushwhacker days up at Nevada. Well, my Lord, those guys were just wanton killers, most of them.
I make a talk about the ball robbers, and I start out by saying Mark Twain said, the West had never been settled without the vigilantes.
Yeah, that's right.
And Louis L'Amour, one of his westerns, said, no man can be understood except against the background of his time.
Yeah, that's right.
That's so true.
That is exactly true. That's right.
And another quotation I love in a book they read recently. I read a lot of his books in large print. Family in Tennessee, and the father had been killed by a bunch of horse thieves or something. And Mother was a strong character, tall, 6 foot tall. Told about how some people stole her horses. She got on a horse and went after them with a Winchester and killed one of them and brought the horses home. That's just a little background. And then her youngest son was ready to leave home to go west. Said she gave him the best horse and saddle and his father's Winchester and pistol, and followed him to the gate. And she said, "Come back when you're of a mind to, for I'll be here. Time will put seams in my face like of the bark of an oak, but never in my spirit."
Yeah, well, that's right. That's a good quote. That's a good quote. Let me.
But this girl that does, it's editor of the Taneycomo Republican now,
Yeah.
Linda Morgan.
Yeah.
She had a nice editorial about me the other day.
Oh,
On my
gosh.
88th birthday. And she is a great-great-granddaughter of this Uncle Tom Smith I was talking about.
Oh.
Now,
Yeah.
you want me to
Yeah, it's
tell
on.
you?
Go ahead. I got it
All
on.
In the days before the railroad came to Branson, 1906, the wagon freighters hauled from Kirbyville, this area, to Harrison, to Springfield and back. Well, one of these freighters was Tom Smith. Now, after the railroad came, there was no need to go to Springfield, but he would freight from Branson Depot to Kirbyville. And he lived just a mile south of our house on the old Springfield and Harrison Road. And many times, my sister, I was about 9, his sister 7. Many times we'd catch a ride with Mr. Smith. We all called him Uncle Tom. Catch a ride to the school. And our families were just great friends, very close. Many, many, many years after that, when I was county clerk, Tom Smith was an old man. Someone had brought him to Forsyth, and he was sitting in my office. I was county clerk. And he was a quiet man, never did say much. Had a little gray mustache, I remember so well, real thin. And he said to me, "Douglas, did your father and mother own that watermill on Long Creek at Oasis, don't they?" I said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "Well, when I was a boy, we drove there to drove a team of oxen." He said, "We'd camp on the road, and we boys would pull blue stem grass to feed the oxen. Then we'd camp another night at the mill while we got our flour and corn ground, maybe 2 nights. And then the long trip home, camp again on the road." And I said, "Well, Uncle Tom," I said, "those are really hard times, weren't they? I have a little Chevrolet car, and I can drive over there in an hour now." He said, looked out the window towards those blue hills, and he said, "Well, those were good times. If I knew where there was another country like it, I'd start in the most."
I always thought that was a good story. Well,